Welcome back, everyone, to the We're Talking to You conversation. If you've been following along, you know that means one thing. The cream mix has officially arrived. For those of you who do not know me, I'm Lucretia, and today I'm joining Jay Dominique and Prometheus for what I hope is the beginning of many thought-provoking conversations. Now, before we get into today's topic, I want to give these gentlemen a chance to introduce themselves, tell the audience who they are, what they're about, and what perspective they bring to the table. Jay, let's start with you.
Great, beautiful people. I go by the name Jay Dominique, aka J Dot, the man that brings food for thought to both the have and the had not at your service.
Good evening, all. I'm the man, the one that's known as Prometheus, the resident old head, the man who stole fire from the gods and brought it to you, the people. And on that, starting off today's show, this is a safe space for us to unpack heavy things, share the messy truth, and remind each other that healing is a journey and not a destination. The journey we're about to start is a journey on mental health. So, starting off, I would say one of the things we want to do is say, how do we approach all aspects of mental health? How does culture, religion, and socioeconomic factors influence perceptions of mental health? And why is this term so often associated with mental illness instead of overall mental wellness? Jay, what are your thoughts on that?
Okay, brother, that's a lot to unpack, so I'm going to take it nice and slow for our viewing audience so that we can all have an opportunity to kind of take a look at these three veins that Pro just laid in front of me. So the commonality is that culture, religion, and socioeconomic status inform most people on social norms and mores. I would like to speak not exclusively from the Black community standpoint, but I do want to begin with the Black community standpoint because it's an area in which I have a lot more knowledge, understanding, and a lot more of a connection to, and then we can break it more out into a wider audience as we move along. So religion and culture for the longest have impacted the average Black community. And we don't have to get into the particulars about how we got religion, whose religion is right or wrong, but what we do know is that Black folks seem to love some religion. And so for most of the Black existence here in America, it has been driven by religious texts, right? Dogmas, et cetera, et cetera. And in religious terms, there's not a lot of wiggle room to look at mental health through anything other than whether or not you are a servant of God or you're being tempted by the devil, right? And so that doesn't leave a lot of room for human nature to be explored. And so it shouldn't be any shock to anyone that means that you're going to have a pretty rigid subculture, right? The mentality in most Black homes is if something's going on that's a little bit out of whack with one or more family members, let's just pray it away. Let's just get together. Let's talk about it. Let's put it in the hands of Jesus, or let's put it in the hands of Muhammad, and we'll let that supernatural being run its course. As it relates to culture, I feel like the Black culture has been defined enough as a subculture in America to where we can make some distinctions. I think that in a lot of ways, we have been very restrictive and very conservative just because of the nature in which we were introduced to culture. We were always the last to be able to do a thing. And so if mental health is one of these things that's newer to the table in the last 15, 20 years, is something that's really been examined a little more closely, and there's a lot more commentary about it. It shouldn't be that odd that the Black community as a whole is a little bit slower to the conversation. And mostly it's because of superstition. It's just the way that things used to be when you're in the household. Everyone felt like they had that crazy uncle or they had that auntie that was kind of like out of whack. And they always had the kid that we would say is just a little bit slower than the others. But that was kind of baked into how we understood our family dynamic. Everybody's household had one of those three, right? And then if you want to throw the 1900s into the fray and you want to say individuals that identify with the LGBT community, that was also something that was looked at for a long time in our community as being some mental illness of some sort. I would say, just to bring it back full circle, we have always kind of lagged a little bit behind major mainstream ideologies and have been slower to unthaw from the Judeo-Christian values that most households had as it's gotten like growing up. And then lastly, the socioeconomic status is very simple. Those that don't have access to healthcare, those that don't have access to books and other ways to increase knowledge and understanding about the human body and the mind are pretty much locked out of that conversation. And so since that hadn't been introduced into our community in a real meaningful way until now, everyone's talking about it. And now it's like a race to figure out who can become the most eloquent to speak about mental health and mental illness in our community is just something that we've now started to evolve in.
Thank you. So, Lou, same question to you, but before you answer, do you agree or disagree with Jay's assumption?
Actually, I do agree with that. All of it, really, because really the main thing, especially with religion, was all you got to do is pray and we'll figure it out. We'll give it to God and he'll take it from here. That was pretty much the main thing about it. And so I don't really, and without pretty much repeating the exact same thing that he said, because I agree with it, I think there was a second question that you asked him. I'm not sure if I remember that.
Why
Oh,
mental
yes.
illness pretty much associated with mental health and
Yeah.
not both?
Yeah, I'll speak to that piece because I do agree with you when you say that, because and I really think it just mental health association with mental illness. I think it's just lack of education. I think anytime that you put mental with anything, anytime you speak the word mental, they automatically take it to something negative and take it to something. Even if you talk about mental health meaning, or even when you talk about mental health, your people typically automatically think of it as a negative, or there's negative connotation behind it, but really mental health is just really a state. It's just not it's not a diagnosis. It's just a state of where you are or how you feel or how you relate to others or what state of mind that you in or how you cope with life. So I think that just anything with the mind and mental, it just scares people. And because of the lack of knowledge about it and the lack of talking about it and the lack of conversation in the Black community specifically, I think that's why you get to that negative
I know. I
connotation.
definitely like what you said about mental health is a state, meaning, and I think that's something to consider as we move forward in this, just in our world, long after we're done on this, is that your mental health should be associated with the state of being where you're at in the world, right? Saying that, I'm gonna move us to our next topic, and I say, okay, and this is to you, Lou, but recognizing the term mental health often comes with a predetermined stigma. Have you been socialized to talk about it, reflect on it, acknowledge it, or even discuss mental health? And were they in line with lessons you would encourage others to exhibit?
Yeah. So first of all, I want to kind of take it back a little bit because mental health, mental wellness, mental illness, those are not things that I ever talked about or even heard about as I was growing up. It just was not a thing. Like Jay said, it was the special, they're there, he's so
Bless your
precious, you know what I'm
heart.
saying? Or bless your heart, child, or the crazy uncle or whomever was in the family. You either blamed it on drugs or you blamed it on alcohol. You blamed it on their distant relationship with religion. You blamed it on whatever else you blamed it on instead of actually talking about what the true issue is. Or even I think people were just scared in the fear of even having to go down the route of having to talk about the fact or the possibility that there may be something going on that would make someone less than quote unquote normal. So I never talked about it at all. We never talked about it. If we ever talked about it, it was just something that you just saw someone else going through something and that was just it. As I got older and started educating myself or being around more like-minded people or just starting opening my mind a little bit more, reading a little bit more and just starting to deal with certain things, especially in college, because college is when I first got introduced to the idea of that there may be something else, or I start even hearing the term therapy, which I had never really heard before unless you talked about going to see a quack. You went to see a doctor, you went to see a quack, quote unquote. That's what it was every single time. So we didn't talk about it at all. You didn't expose that. As I got older, I got into college and I started maturing and I started being around different types of cultures and different people from different places, even because my mom is from the South and my dad's from the island. So that's a whole nother set of we're not going to talk about the problem. Like down south, we're going to give it to Jesus, and in the islands, you don't have a problem. You just don't have one. I don't know what your issue is, but it's not that. It has nothing to do with mental illness and mental health. I got older, started being around friends who were just a little bit more culturally diverse, I think, where it was a little more acceptable in their cultures to talk more about it. And then, so that's when I actually was introduced to it in a more positive light, even though I still in the back of my mind was like something wrong with them because I was stuck in that same thought process that I was taught, over the course of growing up, and not taught even by my parents, just taught because that is just what TV taught you, that something was wrong with you.
You highlighted something in the beginning. You said the term quack. And that reminded me of a time in the
Yeah.
Army. We used to call having to go see the seventh floor. It was just synonymous with what I don't know if somebody has a hospital on a military base, but the seventh floor was the part of the hospital where mental health patients, like the psych ward. And we always used to joke and say, you got to go see Mr. Wizard, right? So you talked about quack, Mr. Wizard, head shrinker. These are all pejoratives used to describe something that we're trying to lay out as it's quite natural to need mental wellness. So do you think these pejoratives, where do you think that comes from? Like,
I don't know. But I think deep down I don't know where it comes from specifically, but I think deep down it just comes from fear and lack of education. I think it's just as simple as that. You don't know about it, so it's easy what you don't know about to say something bad about, or what you fear, then you automatically hate.
great point.
And then it requires you actually think about maybe the possibility of something, sometimes a reflect of something that sometimes you'll just project something negative if it makes you have to think within too much. And I think those are just projections, projected type terms. The same way they say the people who are the most homophobic are typically the ones that are fighting the fact that they are homosexual themselves. I think it's the same thing. You talk about a doctor in a certain way, you're just projecting something because either you don't want to deal with something, your fear of not being normal, or your fear of not being considered strong, your fear of being considered weak because there may be something going on with your mental wellness. I think that comes from that.
So Jay, I'm going to pivot that question to you. So do you think terms like loony bin, quack, Mr. Wizard, head shrinker, obviously those are all pejoratives. How do you see that as, I guess, working to not, I guess, working against lessening the stigma associated with mental illness and mental health and mental wellness? What would way we should get used to talking about that in society?
The first thing that comes to mind to me is that deflection is an art that all human beings possess in their toolbox, and so it's relative. Some people choose to laugh their way out of uncomfortability, and then others choose to try to shift the conversation by making others laugh. So when I hear these terms in my mind, I think that it's someone that's trying to take the edge off of something that's real serious, something that could be afflicting them or someone else, so much so that their way to be able to dissociate, and that's a key word in mental health space, right? They have to find a way to be able to separate themselves from the actual topic. So giving it all of these names that A, sound funny, and two, are designed to deflect and to get other people to think about the ha laughy laughy part of it, allows for it to be a little bit more palatable, because anyone that is in the space with someone that is battling or has battled with some mental illness of some sort, or just not having good mental, what's the word I'm looking for, health, it's an uncomfortable thing to have to navigate through, right? And so there's an expression, sometimes we laugh to keep from crying. And I think that is something that is absolutely paramount when people are trying to discuss or get around this topic and don't really want to deal with the gravity of what it really means, right? So I'm thinking about my first and early encounters with this. I'm thinking what we all know, we're all products of our environment, right? We're the sum of our experiences and experiences of others. It wasn't uncommon in the Black community for our elders to come back, say from wars, from Vietnam on forward, coming back and having a mental shattering of some sort that made it hard for them to be able to compartmentalize and leave what happened on the battlefield or wherever they were serving around the world when they got back to the community. And so a way that we were introduced into individuals that had fractured mental health is those individuals that didn't understand or didn't have a way to be able to decompress and a way to be able to really deal with whatever these traumas that they observed or they had to absorb when they were away. So they come back to the community. So these individuals still have children, right? They still are part of families. And so they're being reintegrated back into the Black household, but it's an oddity. That uncle that came back from Nam, or that uncle that came back from someplace, and they're never the same, right? In my particular situation, I had uncles that either were in the penitentiary or served, right? And in both of those instances, coming back from those extreme hardships can break the mind. And we didn't have enough education, right, or wherewithal to be able to look at what it is that they're actually dealing with, what's plaguing them, and to be able to call it out by name and say, hey, this person right here is not crazy. They're not a crack. They're not Uncle Richard, somebody that's really battling and dealing with what we now know as PTSD, right? So as these terms start coming into the American lexicon, it's one of those things where once it's out there, you're like, okay, it makes sense. Now I can put a name to something that I experienced in my past that I otherwise wasn't able to articulate. It wasn't until I got into the University of Hawaii where I began to become educated on what this concept of mental health was, right? It plagued my family so much so that two courses that really changed my outlook on life were one that was actually titled mental illness, and then the other one that was called the cumulative effects of substance abuse. Both of those had damaged and broke my family tree down to where it wouldn't even stand even halfway upright. And so going to those courses and learning about what mental health is and how it does impact and how it does inform behavior, and how these behaviors actually are like a revolving door. If you dismiss someone that's going through a mental health crisis, that doesn't strengthen them and give them the support to be able to overcome it. It sends them into a deeper spiral. And I think that's something that we saw coming up a lot. Instead of being willing to sit and try to figure out how to help our loved ones, our elders grieve, we just laughed about it when we were kids. And when we got older, we just left and just stayed away from them. Hey, I love them to death, but I'm gonna stay away. And so to me, our community, as I said before, has remained a step behind just because we didn't have access to or the curiosity to want to be able to unpack and look at what it really is. But now that it's here and everything you turn on has it somewhere in the buzzword, now we have a lot of very well-known Black clinicians that have came to the forefront and are really paving a way to be able to pass it along to our Black community in a way in which we can digest it in a more appropriate way. Because the reality is this, right? We're three Black people in front of them, and we are skeptical about what is told to us from others versus what is told to us from people that look like us. We understand that we have to take everything with a grain of salt because there could be an ulterior motive. So now we have enough people that look like us that are willing to talk about it. Now it's, oh, now I can put a name to something that I experienced otherwise as an adolescent. I wasn't able to really understand it or even to be in a position to open up our arms and to embrace our loved ones that's been battling this.
Yeah, it's really that. It's really the biggest piece of that is recognizing it, understanding it, put a name to it, understanding you're not alone in it, and then understanding that there's a space, there's now somewhere that you can go. There's now a next step. I've understand it, I've got it diagnosed, there's a name, there's a community, and there's even work I can do to try to help that. And now you don't feel alone, or you don't feel fearful of yourself or fearful of the people around you that may be dealing with something. Now you feel validated. And I think most people didn't want to talk about it and didn't want to deal with it because they didn't feel seen, heard, or validated. But once you get that out there, once everyone starts to speak about it, and once we provide spaces where people can feel comfortable, then they can feel validation. And once people feel validation, they feel comfort, and then they can actually start doing the work they need to do to overcome those things.
Well, a question for you on that. How do we, and obviously this isn't something we can shift. The three of us aren't going to change right now, but how the collective community, like how do we shift that to get to take the weirdness out of mental, so that we can even have the conversation about mental health, mental illness, mental.
I think it's
just we got to be able, as a culture and a community, be able to have that conversation.
Yeah, I think it starts with even what we're doing right now, just having the conversation between the three of us, even having the conversation. Nowadays, there's so many spaces, there's so much reach, so much knowledge out there at your fingertips that you start by, we as a community, we have to start with the people that are closest to us, and then start with your children, start with your brother, start with your sister, start being able to have the conversation. And it can even start with as simple as, how you doing today? How you feeling? How did that test go? How is school going for you? How was work? You came home tired. How do you feel? It starts with just trying to actually really ask the question, and then actually be genuinely interested in the answer. It also starts in situations, like I said, like this, where we're talking about it, making people feel comfortable, providing safe spaces. Social media you can even use to talk about it. If you have something to say about it, you can use your platform and talk about it. Maybe your circle may be small because it's just people that follow you, that know you, but that's still a start, because that's still somewhat a reach, and that's still you reaching out and getting to other people. And then once they see it and they feel it and they hear it, then they can start having the conversation. It's almost just like planting the seed so that it grows, and then that from little piece of the tree or plant falls off, plants another seed, and it grows, and then it continuously. Now you have this full garden in bloom of people who are just not afraid to have the conversation about mental state, mental wellness, and mental illness.
Great point. Got a question for both you all. Do you think, I think, because Jay brought up something earlier about the notion of therapy is just usually tied to healthcare, which then is tied to an economic case, the ability to afford it, right? Do you think we don't take enough advantage in our community of the informal therapeutic networks? For example, the barber shop, and I would assume beauty shops are what would be the counter to that. But in the Black male community, the barber shop, there was a time in the barber shop you could get everything and discuss everything in there. And it was almost considered a sacred space where where to be misogynist, but women really weren't not welcomed in there, but a barber would tell a mother to leave her son and come back and pick him up. But it was because it was just a space where we were allowed to be vulnerable. We were allowed to take the armor off. Do you guys see the value in those networks to support mental health?
Yeah, let me start by saying this because I think there's a distinct difference between therapy
Ooh.
and coaching. And so when they talk about mental illness and mental health, they automatically go immediately to therapy. But therapy is really a space where you need to try to uncover the why the why you feel the way that you feel, the why you're going through what you're going through, what happened to get you to this space. And the coaching piece is now that I know the why or now that I know the how, now I need to start talking about the work I need to do. When you talk about spaces like beauty shops and barber shops and things like that, yeah, those things can be probably therapeutic because you can get some things off of your chest. But I don't think if you're having an ongoing, reoccurring issue, that space would work for you. I think where you need to be is to start trying to unpack the why so that you can really start understanding the work. And I would always say it like this because there would be times where, and I'll simplify it. They're like, say for instance, you get upset, right? And you're pissed off about something. And then you tell someone why you're pissed off. And people automatically assume because you've said out loud why you're pissed off, you're supposed to not be pissed off anymore. Or maybe you're pissed off and you don't even really know what the issue is, but all you know is that you're pissed off. If you don't really recognize, really truly dig deep as to what about the scenario upset you, really peel back what about that issue upset you, you're actually never going to feel better about it. You're never going to be able to specifically address or speak what your problem is, and then you'll never be able to move forward to move yourself out of that emotion of anger. And so that's why so I think it's the same way with mental illness or mental health or any issue that you're dealing with regards to that, is that if you don't really truly understand what got you there, you're never going to be able to, there's no work to be done because you don't even know what you're working on. I can't put stitches on your knee when your elbow is scratched up. What's the point of that? So really get to the bottom of the pain by you choosing therapy and then start getting coaching so that you can really start to do exercises and ways to work your way out of that. Does that make sense?
Do you have anything to say with that? First, I want to say thank you for highlighting, I guess, and highlighting the differences and similarities between coaching versus therapy. I think that's very good for us as a community to really understand where the two work together, but where they're totally opposite and how not to confuse the two terms. Again, I want to thank you for that. So Jay, how do you say on that?
After listening to Lucretia, I feel I'm simultaneously evolving a little bit. When you first made mention of the barbershop and the beauty salon, et cetera, being that I, for a brief period of time, a couple of years, was involved in the industry, I know that those types of service providers are typically called therapists, right? Meaning that's where people come and when they want to be able to, as Lucretia said, take a look at what's going on in their immediate life and just to have someone help them to walk their way through that. I think the delineation between coaching and therapy is a great one to be able to make distinctions because I feel most people feel most comfortable in the coaching space, and the relativity piece to it can help a person to start walking down that pathway. But I feel like it depends totally on how deep and how afflicted the person is. If someone is going through some hard times in life that are pretty common, then that coaching piece can give them a sense of relativity, a sense of community, a sense of, okay, I'm not the one that's tripping. I'm not the only one that feels now like I'm going through this alone. And sometimes that can jumpstart a person down their path of self-discovery. That doesn't necessarily mean that's going to get the person to a point to where they're able to actually move past whatever it is that's afflicting them. So I was thinking there's typically two different ways in which a person is moving through a hardship and through negative mental health crises, right? Either you're born with or born into that with some physical and mental things that come through hereditary means, right? Or they're trauma induced. And I think that more people that we come across probably are impacted because of the trauma induction piece than being born into it. I think someone that's born into it, absolutely you need therapy because there's no antidote, there's no quick fix. It's a lifestyle that you have to be able to develop to be able to cater to whatever it is clinically that you've been diagnosed with, whether you've been actually physically diagnosed properly or it's just evident, right? But I think that most of our listeners will probably be able to hover in the coaching side a little bit more because there are common themes that tend to happen in society at large, and then specifically in the Black community through generational curses, as we sometimes call them, right? And so I, for long, was not a fan of going to see a clinician, right? And I'm still evolving on that. The great news is that I do recognize that this thing that has been dubbed mental health is a real thing. And the way that I reconcile it in my mind is that I know that there is a brain and a mind. And I know that the brain is what causes the physical body to operate and function. But the brain is something, the mind is something that's parallel to that, is often unseen, but it does have a set of prime movers that it's responsible for impacting. And when your mind is in bad repair, it can be the same catastrophic types of things as when your brain has had an injury. And so I understand that. And so now I'm willing to sit down at the table and entertain what could therapy look like. But I think the one thing, regardless of whether you decide you're going to try to do your own journey of self-reflection, or if you're going to go sit down with a clinician, first step is really being willing to be honest with looking at the self. Because I know there's some people that will go and spend money to go sit down and talk to a clinician, but if they're not comfortable with sharing every single thing that is actually afflicting them, they're going to be spinning their wheels. They may be making some progress as far as a clinician is concerned, keeping the track on and breakthroughs, et cetera, et cetera. But if you're not going to be honest and put everything on the table, no matter whether it's coaching or therapy, you're not going to see those results. You're not going to get to the end of that finish line and then be able to step into a more positive self outlook about your mental health. I love the fact that you actually brought to the conversation those distinctions, because I think we can have a lot more conversations of development if we look at therapy versus coaching, because coaching can just beget a good feeling while you're there with the person, and then you leave their presence and you go back to the thing that is afflicting you, and now you're not armed with a way to be able to navigate through it. So then you're going to come back to that same person and then you're going to talk to them about the same thing over again. I know we all have a friend that comes and talks about the same old, and
how many times I'm over it.
So much so that you can stop them and you can finish their sentence, right? But in my opinion, they've fell in comfort with the coaching, and they have yet to really want to find the way to move themselves out of that negative space.
Yeah, I've told some of my clients in the past where I'll be very clear in that I cannot diagnose you with anything. If you feel that there's some other issues, there's some other things that are going on that are deeper, that I suggest that you can seek a therapist if you like to, seek your doctor if you like to, because that's not the space that I'm in. I'm really in the space helping you identify, and then also helping you, giving you methods in which to overcome certain things and different coping mechanisms. But it has nothing to do with if there's something else that you really need to be truly walking back to or walking back through, that you need to be speaking to someone else, an actual doctor, because I'm not a doctor, nor will I actually claim to be one. And I'm not going to fake like I know that I could be writing prescriptions or anything like that. But there was something else that you said I thought that was interesting, because therapy and the honesty piece of it and the transparency piece of it, that probably is a hard piece. That's hard, but that's not what's the hardest part about therapy and why people tend to stray away from it. To look back into yourself, that's the piece that's the hardest piece, is having to look at yourself and relive certain things that people want to just speed right past. And then so they speed past those things and they want to be in the coaching space, and then they keep falling back into the same bad issues, habits, feelings, depression, whatever it may be. But it's because the work that you have to do to relive and revisit and re-speak out loud the trauma, that's hard. It's a really hard thing to do, and it's exhausting, it's taxing, and it takes a lot out of you. And that's the part that makes people so afraid, because now they've got to deal with something that they really tried to bury.
Thanks for the clarification between, again, coaching, and I definitely learned something. Hope others have learned it. I do want to ask one more question as it relates to coaching, just because you put that up there, and I think that's a great topic. I think when people come into coaching, do you believe that they're actually coherent and understand that they should be seeing a therapist? Or do you think for a lot of people, they just operate in that space? I'm talking about something like getting that mental health boost, It's all this. It's all relevant.
Mhm.
It's all the same. Do you think they actually know? Are there people who just? It's easier, like you said, to do the coaching work than it is to do therapy work. What do you think?
Oh, it's so funny because most of the times when people come to me, and especially if they find out that I'm a life coach, or like they just come to me like, fix my life. That's literally how everyone shows up. My door, like, oh my God, you're a life coach, fix my life. Oh, what is your problem? What's the thing? What's the thing that you want? What's the result you want? What's the thing you're trying to move past? So people who typically are open to coaching, most likely, and believe it or not, are open to therapy as well. So I don't typically find that there's an issue between people who want to go to the coaching because they just don't want to do the therapy. I don't think that's it at all because so I think it seems like it would be the case, but that's not the case most times. I don't typically have to go down the road. I don't typically find with my clients that I have to go down that road because I stick within a specific niche of it. So it's not in life coaching. And I think it's really, people say it so often. You hear the term so often that people just really think that someone shows up to your office and they talk about their life. And then all of a sudden you give them tools on how to fix all facets of their life. And that's not what it is in the slightest. It really requires them still have some self-awareness and still have something to come to the table on what they want to talk about. And it really requires a dig deep in that too. So I don't think it's an issue of therapy or trying to dodge it in any way, but I do think people tend to hear the word life coach and just think that my life's a mess. Someone's going to come in here and fix it for me.
Thank you on that.
Not life's a mess. I shouldn't have said that. Not life's a mess because I don't think that's just some of the things I've heard them say. Help me, I can't figure this out. And really, it's just,
So
what would you like help with? And they're like, I don't know.
things. So before we move forward, Jay, I wanted to, if you wanted to add anything to that or ask a couple more questions for some clarity as it relates to coaching versus therapy, or just share some more insight.
I rest on the belief that people are more inclined to become comfortable in the coaching atmosphere because it's a path of least resistance. When you're sitting and you're talking with
Yeah.
somebody and you're sharing an experience, then it's not as much of a call or a task for you to have to actually dig deep and look within yourself. You can stay at the surface level dwelling with someone talking about something that you have in common that you need to be fixed, right? And I'm sure people come into clinical offices all over the place with the mindset, I'm not the only person that's dealing with this. This tends to happen to a lot of people. So there has to be some antidote. There has to be some mental elixir. There has to be some give it to me in a pill form or give it to me straight and then I'll take it and I'll forever be a better person. But we don't see that ever working in any other aspects of people's self-improvement. You can't tell someone to go to the gym, go through the dog days, go through the hard days, and you're going to have to change your diet along with your exercise in order to actually see results. People will say, no, tell me 10 or 15 more exercises to do and I'll do that, but I don't want to have to change my diet. And the reason why the diet is so important is because the diet is the single most individual choices that you have to make in your day. If you have children, you might have to say, what am I going to choose to cook for my children? Just at a person to person level, at the person to person level, the decisions that you make about what you put in your body are going to be the hardest decisions that you'll ever have to make, because you'll know that putting certain things in your body is going to cause your body to respond in a negative way. But then you're like, oh, but I like it. I don't want to do it because it's harder, it's palatable. I'm going to have to reset my palate, et cetera, et cetera. When you're talking to people about surface level problems, you don't necessarily have to take ownership in that problem. You can fellowship with someone in the circumstance and be like, see, this is what happened. So that's why it feels a lot more therapeutic to a person to come and be like, I had this wonderful conversation about something and it really caused me to have a breakthrough. What do you mean a breakthrough? If you don't even know what your actual role is in whatever you're dealing with, in my opinion, you can't necessarily have a real legitimate breakthrough. What you can have is a aha, right? You can be like, oh, okay, cool. Now I have a better understanding. But if I'm to understand therapy, the goal is to get a person to have to one-on-one confront themselves. And that's the hardest thing. That's what most people don't want to do, especially in today's modern society. People don't want to sit still, but guess what? All throughout time, people have not wanted to sit still, but they were socialized to sit still, so they developed coping mechanisms. But now we're in this space where someone's like, hey, I can't sit still, so now don't expect me to sit still, and now I don't have any ownership in having to sit still, now you're never really having to come across the realities of why is it that I actually fidget, or what is it about me sitting still that makes me uncomfortable. I see that more people are in search of a quick relative fix than to have a change in lifestyle. And I think that's probably what therapy has to offer people, is a pathway to having to change your lifestyle versus just saying, what I acknowledge that we went through this, and hey, everyone went through this. Let's throw ourselves a pity party, saying let's eat some chocolate and let's get up and let's act as if this conversation never happened and go back and do it again.
I'm offended by all that. I am. I'm offended by that. I am. I'm offended by that. And let me just say what I got to say before that we can move on. I'm offended by that because there's no point in time that coaching is like raw sis kumbaya. Everybody feels this way. High five. You are required to have some self-awareness because there's no way for us to move forward. Again, I can't diagnose you with anything. And if you're having something that's reoccurring and something that's deeper, then I would suggest you see a therapist or something like that. But if you're talking to me and you have an issue with something, we will peel back. I will ask you over and over, how does that make you feel? What will having that do for you? Until we can get to a space where your problem and the result you want is out of an 8 or 9 or 10 on the scale of 1 to 10, we're not moving forward. So you do have to understand yourself, what you need and what you want. You're not going to come to me and say, hey, I really would like to lose weight. Oh yeah? Why? What would losing weight do for you?
Hey,
I'll look really good in this dress. What will looking good in that dress do for you? And this is a real life example, because when I look good in the dress, then I'll feel pretty. Okay, feeling pretty. What is feeling pretty? What will that do for you? How will that make you feel? Because then my husband will look at me
well,
more.
there's still an underlying issue of something else.
Okay. So then so your husband, okay, so you want to lose weight because you want to look pretty in the dress because you want your husband to look for you. That's really great. And so what would having that do for you? How does that make you feel? Then they have to talk about it. My husband hasn't spoken to me. He hasn't touched me. He hasn't done this. He hasn't done that. So now really the problem is not that you want to lose weight. The problem is that you want your husband's attention. And then we can talk about that. And so I think that it's not a rah-rah. It is not a situation in which you do not actually have to look within. It's just, I can't diagnose you and I can't get you to a space especially if you have a true chemical imbalance in your brain that nothing I'm going to be able to say is going to get through, because you really do need medicine. Otherwise, it is a lot deeper than that. So yes, I hear what you're saying, but I was like, I'm a little offended because it is really not like a rah-rah session. It really is a look within type of a session. It's just not, I just can't. You've got some real childhood trauma and it's keeping you up at night, and it's been doing that for 25 years. I think that what I'm providing and my mechanisms for you, you may have run through this so long, for so deep, that there may be, let's talk about really that and really unpack that piece before you can get to me. So yes, it's not surface, but it's not.
And I every single thing you just said. Allow me to amend my statement and to offend you properly, because I didn't mean to do that. When I was thinking about coaching, I was thinking in the general sense. Remember, I led off saying about therapists. So I was thinking in the general sense that anyone talking to someone else outside of a clinician was in that coaching context, whereas a therapy session is with a clinician. And to be 100% transparent with you, I understand that there is an actual field for life coaching, but that seldom enters my mind ever. I never think about a life coach, and I don't want it to be disrespectful to the profession. I know it's legitimate. I'm not saying it's not legitimate, but I'm saying for me, I'm thinking more along the lines of people having communications with people, sometimes perfect strangers in spaces, and being able to have that liberty to share whatever.
Yeah, that's not coaching. That's just trauma dumping. They just trauma dump people.
So just to land, just for the distinction, just so that we're clear, my statement is coming from a framework of anyone outside of a clinician, and I would consider what you're talking about real clinical work, just in a different title.
Gotcha.
Coach to me is something that we can get from anyone at any given point in a conversation, whereas doing the detailed work of what you just stated and everything that's encompassed in that, I don't think that the average person is equipped with that hardware to be able to walk a person through that. So again, if I'm going to offend you, it would be that my mind wasn't thinking about an actual actual life coach, as a respected person in the career field of clinical mental health specialist, et cetera, et cetera.
Okay, I'm offended properly.
Transitioning a little bit, and again, thank you for that. So sadly, when a person's mental health isn't strong, that weight they carry can be so crippling that they enter into a space of severe depression. And then sadly, when depression is left unchecked, it can lead to self-harm and at times death. Can you talk to us about what you know of suicide and how it's affected you and others? And do you think in our progressive society we talk about it enough, or is it still something that's considered taboo?
Okay, so this is in my wheelhouse based on the profession that I'm in. So I'll start first with my personal experience with it, and then I'll talk about it a little bit through the lens of being an educator in a public school setting, in which we have to go through trainings and we have to deal with these types of unfortunate sets of decision making all the time. In my household, the word suicide was never mentioned by that, but I've personally experienced seeing someone commit suicide, and not in the necessarily intended way. I remember as a child walking into a bathroom and one of my mother's friends had overdosed. I assumed that it was heroin because she had a needle in her arm, and my mother didn't take the time to have a conversation with me about that. But I was of the age, I'm 7, 8 years old, closer to 9, and the fact that she didn't want to sit and debrief me on that actually stood out to me. But I was also in an environment where those things were either shown in movies or they were talked about in a secondhand way. So there really wasn't a lot of, I didn't really place any real stock or importance. And I was scared as hell, obviously, when it took place. But I was able to move past that memory. It wasn't until, unfortunately, I was 16 years old and I attempted to take my own life that it actually came full circle for me. And I have often reflected on what took me to that point, the method that I used and why didn't it work, and how thankful I am that decision wasn't carried out to its finality. But it had kind of skewed my outlook on it, right? Because when I found myself in that space, knowing what I know now, I wasn't going through a deep depression. I was going through a terrible set of circumstances. I was adult and estranged with my mother, and I was completely embarrassed at the fact that she chose to very publicly live out being hooked on crack cocaine and prostitution. And it was in the same environment that I grew up in. And so I couldn't escape it. And even when I moved away, when my grandmother took me in, I was still very much traumatized by the fact that she chose that lifestyle over me. So in that instance, when I decided that I was going to ingest some of my grandma's medications and myriad pills, I was wanting to get away from the embarrassment and the shame and the anger that I was feeling, that I didn't have any control over my mother's behaviors. And thank God, some point in my grandmother's mini career, she was a nurse and she was able to respond fast and got me to Harborview Medical Facility. They pumped my stomach and we went through a whole ordeal there. But after that, my grandmother swore me to secrecy with that. One of the first things she said when we got to the car, and I had to stay there. I remember I had to stay there overnight. And when she came back and I was able to be released, some of it is still a little fuzzy with me because when I went in there, I wasn't in the best condition. But I do know some of the things that still stick out to me. And when I was able to be released, when we were on the ride home in the car, one of the first things she said is, "You need to shut your mouth. Nobody needs to be in our business about this." And so it wasn't until years later that I felt comfortable and confident enough. I had told perfect strangers for years about the experience before I even told one person in my bloodline, because my grandmother had shut that down along with other things. And so my outlook, even then, I didn't really think that there are some things that can actually go on in the human brain that can cause people to get to such a depth of despair that they're willing to take their own life, or through a traumatic experience that injures their brain. And they want to. These are the things that I came across as I became older and started gaining more of an understanding through education. Now, bringing it back full circle, as a classroom teacher and dealing with young people, we have to be very vigilant and on top of those things, because there are more often than not symptoms of of a young person that's struggling with that. And yes, there's all these hotlines. There are these ways to text. There's anonymous ways to go about talking to trying to get help for your friend. But in a lot of cases, being a classroom teacher, we see behavioral patterns shift in a student. We go through this coursework. We take these trainings that train us, and we're mandated reporters. So we have to be on the lookout for certain behavioral changes, things that are associated with suicide, and namely deep depression. The great news is that in most schools that have the funding, they have an on-site clinician. They have a space where they can go to and just kind of cool off and think about things. We call it a wellness center at my particular school. And there's all these preventative, or there's all these preemptive types of things that can happen. It wasn't until I actually was tasked with being on the lookout and being vigilant and recognizing that I do have anywhere from 24 to 35 students that I have to make sure that I try my best to protect them, not just from others, but from themselves, that I had to really educate myself. And our school district has done a good job of sending us through training. I've had friends that I've lost through suicide in high school and as adults. And when I reflect on it, I think that I've actually turned the page. My thought process initially used to be that's a very selfish thing to do, because you're going to leave others at a loss and at a deficit. And I understand that in that space, you feel like no one wants you, no one cares about you. You're absolutely alone, and isolation can do that to a person. But I used to have that in my heart when I heard about suicide. I'm like, that is such a selfish thing for that person to do. They're going to leave someone scarred forever, and they get away with this free. Like, where they leave once you pass from this physical form, we don't know. It can be heaven or hell, anything in between. But what we do know is that leaves a vacuum when someone decides to take their life. And people are always thinking, I could have done more. What could I have done? Why couldn't I have seen this? And so I kind of settled on that until I gained a better understanding and went through training on exactly what happens to a person that can drive them to that place. Now I'm more compassionate when I think about it. It's still very melancholy to me, because for the 5 individuals that I have lost in my lifetime, to that sometimes think, dang, I wish they could have seen me where I'm at now. But then I also think, dang, I wonder where they would have been themselves if they would have just gave themselves a little bit more time. So I've evolved from looking at it as a escape, or convenient escape, or something that's going to leave a lasting impact and harm other people in its wake, to saying, what, it's a sad thing that this person got to this point and no one could help them just one more day to see that maybe there's something on the other side of that they could have as an experience in mind. Because I'm 49 years old. Had I succeeded at 16 years old, I know for a fact that I've had a lasting impact on lots of people, and I never would have had an opportunity to impact people with the butterfly effect that I have up to this point. So I'm not thinking about it anymore from just the person and their plight. I'm like, dang, I wish that they understood how interconnected we are as people, and how this thing that you're feeling may be momentary, or it may be something that, like Lucretia said, needs a little bit of diagnosis and needs some sort of medication for. But left unchecked, it's just a sad thing. To anyone that has also experienced those kind of losses, that's not something you ever can forget, right? It just causes you to remember the last time that you seen that person, or you talked to that person, or you thought about that person before that happened. And unfortunately, that's one of the only things in life that time can't undo.
Thank you for some of the vulnerability and the openness. I can also share, sadly, having been in the military, that's one of the things I think we are highly disproportionately affected by, either knowing someone who committed suicide or being connected to suicide. I think if I sit out and do the math, the last time I checked, it was 12 people that I can distinctly remember that took their own life that I can also, but it's not 12 people that I knew of through someone else. These are 12 people that I at one time have had conversations with and sat face to face, laughed with, kicked it, to the point where I think there's a numbness that comes over you when something comes across social media and they'll say, oh, such and such took their life. You almost just, now it's just, damn. I understand personally, like, I empathize with how dark that hell they were in was, that they felt like that was the only option out, because I definitely gone through depression, but I've never been in the space of depression where I thought that was a viable option for me. So I can only empathize, and my heart actually breaks to consider that there are people who were walking with that for so long. That was the only option out there. And like I said, I know off the top of my head 12 people, but that's not counting other people that I know go through 2 or 3 degrees of separation where I heard of such and such who was friends with somebody. So that's one for me that I also try to be more mindful and accessible to others so that I can show empathy. And that's one of the reasons why I had the last phone number I just changed. I just recently changed it, but I had that phone number because while I was in the military, I had this fear that somebody would reach out to me. I'd be the only person they could remember to talk to, and the number that they would have would be that number. Because I say where that came from is a friend of mine took his life in September 2015, right? And I remember maybe 6 hours before it happened, he put this real cryptic, weird ass Facebook post message out that said something to the effect like, "Who's up right now?" At the time, I was stationed in Germany, so that was 7 hours ahead of the East Coast, 6 hours ahead of the East Coast. So it was about 4 in the morning my time. So when I looked on that at that time, I said, I'll just call him later on that night, meaning later on the day my time. However, and you remember, Jay, there was no later on. It was followed by a whole lot of boxes like, "Oh my God, did y'all hear?" And that stuck with me for a long time because I always wondered what I could have done or said in that moment had I reached out, right? I had to go through therapy on my own as we talked to recognize I might have been able to spare him at that moment, but whatever work that needed to be done internally, I would have always had to have been on the phone with him at every hour. And unfortunately, that's not realistic either. So I know we got a little dark and heavy for a minute because this is something that needs to be talked about. And without wanting to, we want to talk about life and we want to promote life, but we also want to acknowledge what depression can look like or what unchecked mental decline looks like. I will give you an opportunity. Lou, is there anything that you would like to add to that with respect to suicide? If you don't, that's okay too. I know it gets a little heavy. It could be triggering.
It's okay. I just appreciate both of you sharing what you've shared. I learned a lot about you today. I think the thing that Jay said that was I just had a mental shift and a different, deeper understanding in a moment where there just was some growth in me is because I was always looking at it as the most selfish thing. I always thought about it as suicide is one of the most selfish things that you can do. Not even thinking about the individual that's going through it, not even thinking about them not being concerned about how it's going to affect other people because really, truly, probably believing that there's no one out there that loves them or what they're feeling is so important. What the pain that they're feeling is so vast that whether or not they're being selfish is the last thing that's on their mind. So I know going forward after this conversation, my level of empathy and my compassion has just changed and grown tremendously because I don't think I'll ever think of it in that way again.
Okay, move on to the last part. I just want to leave some space for reflection on it because you said something that makes a lot of sense, right? You said that even had you been able to field that call, that probably would not have been the end all cure all for it. And you would have had to be willing to be that shoulder to lean on until or unless he was able to find his way through that. And I remember the signs, being shown to me where he and I connected is we connected through music. We rapped together. He felt comfortable enough with me to share his music before he released it out to the world in a lot of different instances because he had a little small circle of us that he trusted. He just wanted to get a critique from people that knew him outside of what he was creating currently. And I remember when he sent me one of the songs, he sent me 2 songs that he had been working on after he had left the area in which we were all stationed in here in California. And one of them was really, really dark. And he was operating under a different name. He was under some group named Kook. And I remember asking him, I said, this is a little bit different than the Chi-Town rendition that I've come to know and love, right? Not saying that the lyrics are bad, not saying that the song isn't formatted properly, but what is this about? And he, dismissed it with a little bit of joke, a little tongue in cheek, and we laughed about it. And then he sent me another one. And I was like, see, now this one is a little bit more of what I know you to be as far as being able to kick a little bit of knowledge, but also have a whole vibe for everyone to follow along with. He made music that made you think about it because he had lyrics, but it was always a vibe. And I remember remember seeing that same post, and I didn't have the excuse of having that 6 hour difference. I saw it in real time, and I was like, I just got out of the Facebook inbox with them about 2 days ago, talking to them about music. So I'll just circle back around. One of the things about the military is that you form these kinds of relationships where you can talk to somebody every day, or you can talk to somebody every month or every year, and you pick right up like you never missed a beat. And so I fell back on that. And when it happened, it hit me hard. I was like, I just was in communication with him, and I was just talking to him about these shifts that was going on within him. And I was thinking I'm just trying to get to know a newer version of him. Didn't really realize all the particulars until we started going to his page and people started being a lot more forthcoming about what their experiences were. So I wanted to be able to share that, because anyone that knows of this particular beautiful soul that decided to make that decision on that day, he impacted them in a very positive way. And we've seen that throughout the last 10, 11 years, right? Almost 12 years now, in that there's still people, including myself, that go to his page and still deposit something there. Thank God his family has not closed down the page, because it's still a space where somebody can come and they can talk about an interaction that they had with him and just say, damn, bro, I miss you, And so I just wanted to put that on the table so anyone that heard you surface your experience with him can feel validated enough to at least sit and think about their last interactions with them, or the things that they wish they could have said to him had they had another day. I just didn't want us to move past that just because it's heavy. Yes, it's very heavy, but suicide impacts us, as I said before, in the fact that people are left here to have to put together the pieces to it and find a way to cope with it. And so it seems to be like one of those gifts that keep on giving, for lack of a better expression.
Thank you. It got a little heavy, but this is what we're here to do. We're here to pull layers back, open wounds, and talk about it, because nothing moves forward without having those awkward, hard conversations. So, in raising the vibrations a little bit, I would say, okay, we did talk about great length about mental health and mental decline, but I want to put it to you, but we didn't really talk about the aspect of a healthy lifestyle. So I want to leave it with you before we close out there. In what way does a healthy lifestyle influence our mental health? What does that mean to you? And what is the significance of healthy choices? And I think you loosely touched on it when you were talking to us about coaching. So I think this is a great segue into that.
So I think it can be really, really simple, which is a really hard question to ask or answer for ourselves. What do we really want, and what really truly makes us happy? And what little things can we do each day to influence that? What little things can we do to get those little dopamine hits? The deposit that you make and the things that you put into yourselves is how you'll show up for the world. So for me, health looks like making sure that I get up and I do the thing that I enjoy the most. One of the things that makes me get ready for my day, which is getting up and exercising. Because for me, exercising just gives me the dopamine hit and gives me the energy that I need to be able to approach the day in a more positive way, especially when I have to deal with, clients or my team. If I've not given myself something or deposited something into myself, then I have nothing else to give anybody else. So it really is that. I think that people are afraid to be selfish. I think that people need to be a little bit more selfish with regards to taking care of themselves and what do they need first. Not what you want, but what do you genuinely need? If you need to say no more because you're always saying yes and people were just draining the life out of you, then I would suggest you do that. If you need to take 15 minutes a day where there's just a quiet space and you need to just shut yourself down where no one has access to you, you should definitely do that. But it really is about just spending a moment each day just asking what I can do for me. Just that simple shift and being okay with selfishness. How do you deposit into yourself before you even try to think about anyone else?
Thank you. I read something a while back when I got back into my fitness journey, and it said one of the things that we take for granted, but it's one of the simple things you have that you can control that really have been shown to affect your health, overall health, positive, mental, internal, is what Jay has said earlier, your diet, type of food you eat. That is one of the things that it's a life you can't control when you go to sleep, when you wake up, when you eat, but you have control, especially as an adult, what you put in your body. And I think we oftentimes sometimes we take that for granted, that you're eating food and not realizing your overall health isn't just exactly. You can't put, like, if you have a certain type of high octane car or high performance car, you can't put low octane gas in it because so you have to be mindful of that. So I say this in closing as we wrap this thing up and bring it home. I say, for those of you who've been rocking with us since day one, we definitely appreciate you. And for those of you who have recently come over for the cream mix experience, we love you even more. I say, well, co-hosts have shared anecdotes and personal narratives about mental health, and I would like to leave you with the following. We all know what a scraped knee looks like. We understand what to do when we catch the flu. But what happens when the pain, injury, or exhaustion is completely invisible? Today's show highlighted the invisible condition, the condition that affects us all. What is it? How do we address it? And how do we live with it? Keyword is, how do we live with it? And on that, I want to also follow, if you should find yourself in any mental health crisis, please call 988 or go to the nearest emergency room or dial 1-800-278-3255. The key word I want you to remember is to reach out and remember no one struggles alone.
We love you.